My name is Qwayne Guevara. I work for the Diocese of Parramatta. I've been in the space for about 7 years now. I wear two hats in the diocese at the moment. One of them is manager of the Catholic Youth Office, and the second is leading our diocesan synod towards a pastoral plan, which will be launched in August this year.
And I'm Samantha Hill. I'm based in the Archdiocese of Brisbane, but work for the Samantha Paul Society Queensland. I'm in the area of mission and membership, and I also am part of the Australian Catholic Youth Ministry network. It exists to help provide a space for young people in ministry to gather and network with each other.
I'm glad Sam has named that because I'm also part of that team.
You forgot that one. It's
Yeah, I
hat
did.
that you wear.
Another hat. Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting question. I travel all over Queensland and spend a lot of time working with the older generation that are within our parishes through my own work. There's a big sense of wanting to feel connected, but also wanting to grow. So what I'm picking up when I'm spending time with our parishioners is that there's a yearning for community and to build our communities, even though they're already situated within a community. So they want to grow, they want to share their faith with other people, but are unsure how to do that, or they don't necessarily have the tools or the avenues to do that work.
One of the great things that came out of our workshop that we facilitated was this reality of all generations having kind of a common need of belonging. And I think in the work that I've had the privilege of doing, which is listening to many different parishes, schools, local communities in our diocese, but I think even in spaces like this, there is that common deep desire for community and belonging. I don't think that changes as people get older. In fact, I recall one story that came out of our own synod listening process of a woman who was in her 90s, and she was saying that for most of her life, she had served the church, she had been engaged in ministries, and as soon as she was in many ways no longer capable of doing that kind of service, she felt as though she was forgotten by her communities. And I would assume that that's not an isolated experience for many of those who would consider themselves, or that we would consider as elderly. And so that need for belonging and communion is universal.
I always say the same thing.
You know, it is.
A place of belonging, a place of acceptance, a place where they can be truly understood for who they are, regardless of their background or orientation, or they just want to be accepted and seen and a part of something. We often tend to put young people in this space over here where they can maybe read, or they might be able to altar serve, or they can attend a youth group, but not necessarily engage them in our broader communities, especially our church outside the wall. So I think they're wanting to be part of the bigger picture, and it's finding the ways to actually engage that. And that's something else that came out in our workshop a little bit, was that there needs to be that intergenerational approach. It's not just siloing young people over here and family ministry here and our more vintage generation over here. It's actually building pathways for people to enter a life of discipleship as a holistic lifelong journey. And our younger generations is where it starts.
I think we always need to kind of situate the realities of our church and the challenges that we face within the context of where we exist. So one of the needs that I'm often encountering when working with young people is this need for connection. And I think perhaps in the past, we've been very good at naming needs that young people have without asking them or what their experience actually is. And that came up in our workshop. You know, we develop all these new initiatives and we facilitate these events, but is that actually what they're yearning for? And is that actually what they hope for themselves in their own lives? So I think two things come to mind. One is the question I have is, how do we expand this notion of a community that's beyond just our parishes? Because many of our young people exist online. So how do we see young people online, connect with them in these different platforms or avenues that has in some way an invitation to that physical gathering, which is so necessary in the life of our church? How do we do that well? And I think young people can actually articulate that for themselves, you know. I think social media is a real opportunity for us in terms of listening to young people and their needs. And I think too, young people need spaces where they can dream and have people accompany them that won't necessarily judge them for the ways in which they might make decisions, but to honor their sacredness exactly where they are. I'm a firm believer that if a young person, or if anyone, knew how deeply loved they are, watch what they do with that. It's actually something about love calls them out of themselves. But I do wonder where are those spaces that we're creating those opportunities for them to be loved, and then for them to pour out that love in new and in exciting ways.
I think Qwayne wrapped it up really well in terms of, or sort of alluded to it a bit in terms of actually asking people what they would like to see. We tend to make the decisions on behalf of people and okay, well, this cohort's going to be responsible for this mass time, and you know there's going to be a family mass on this weekend. So naturally, you've got people that don't want the loud racket or the different music that will kind of disappear and go, oh, I'll go to another mass time that weekend. So there's a couple of strategies that could work there. There's a bit of a holistic parish approach where rather than just having a youth mass here and a family mass here, actually you could incorporate some elements of youth music or some children's music as well as the traditional music all into one setting. Actually have an intergenerational mass setting that has multiple things. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but that's one very simple strategy that rather than having separate masses, actually incorporate elements into one mass. But I think it's that piece around actually taking the parishioners of all generations on the journey and helping each other learn about each age demographic and what each generation is actually seeking from our liturgies. What are they seeking when they're coming to Mass? It's not just about the music, it's often more than the sacrament. It's also about the gathering of the people that are coming together in that space. So if we can find ways to actually bring people together amongst different mass settings and realise that it is more than the music, it's more than the sacrament, it's actually about us gathering, that's a really good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you're saying about it being more than just the liturgy. I think this is often where there's a bit of we hit dead ends because we expect that people will participate and appreciate and fully engage in liturgy, but we don't, I guess, take the step back in thinking about how do we accompany people to that experience of liturgy so that it's not just what they do on a Sunday. Archbishop Christopher Prowse yesterday said that one of the things we don't do so well in the life of the Australian Church is the encounter piece. And I think that's there's something to be said there about possibilities for us moving forward in our local communities, not just in parishes. I do also wonder about our schools. I often bring up the example of the fact that my sense of community isn't necessarily in parish. It's in my basketball women's community. And what makes that different from, a parish setting? I guess the next question is, how do we then integrate those expressions of communion and faith that might sit outside the traditional ways in which we think about our faith communities into this broader concept that could allow us to be more inviting and welcoming, so that people, when they come to Mass, actually recognize just the significance of their presence and God's presence in that space. I hesitate to answer this question because I'm not sure that I can name an ideal when the context in which I exist in, which is the Diocese of Parramatta, is so diverse culturally. So one of the elements or dimensions of our church in the Diocese of Parramatta is that we have many cultures that have made a home in this part of Australia. And so what they bring with them is already kind of an intergenerational reality in the way they do community, right? So I could say that a lot of our Pacific Islander communities, our Filipinos, they in some way already honor the young and the old in a particular way that could be held up as, this is good practice. But I think that when we do that, when we name that as kind of separate from a broader concept of church, the Australian church, we fall into the trap of, again, those silos. So I think there's a long way to go for us to be able to name great practices. I think it's an evolving thing. I think in our walk of becoming a more synodal church, we're also learning along the way areas of possibilities in terms of that hope for an intergenerational church. So I think there's that part to it.
I feel that whilst there's a space for it to evolve within our parish communities, it is already happening, but it's happening in our organisations and agencies that are outside of our worshipping communities, such as the social justice spaces, our charity spaces, Caritas Catholic Mission, you submit to the Paul Society, your Catholic Care, Centre Cares. If I look at some of the initiatives and different organisations in Brisbane, Emmanuel City Mission with the Emmanuel community, they provide spaces and are already spaces where you have a mix of intergenerational people that are gathering together and performing the ministry of outreach, whether it be to the marginalised, whether it be to the socially isolated, whether it be joining together to build community within each other, with each other. So there's definitely a space for our parish communities to find some ways to better connect, and I'm sure there's many areas out there where it is happening, especially in our multicultural communities. They do it very well, but it's also about the spaces that are already provided for people to tap into outside. So it's almost we also need to move our thinking from within the four walls of the church to what is happening in our church, which is outside the walls.
Yeah. I mean, if you needed some practical examples of ways in which it's happened. A lot of our parish councils are beginning to invite young people into that space for that kind of input from younger generations that I've seen as broadening the thinking and the dreaming of our local parish communities. I think we see that in the ways in which a number of our parents who are, parents of young children are stepping into roles of youth ministry because they see a need there, and they're becoming facilitators of grassroots youth ministry initiatives such as building up a new choir or working closely with outreach opportunities to bring young people into that space. So there are examples of that exist. I guess it's just naming them, but also naming them within a context that's hopefully much broader than just parish.
In order for us to be a more intergenerational church, we ourselves need to have openness to that. We need to be able to look through lenses that are broader than our own profession or our own interest area, and be open to the ideas and gifts that other people can bring to the table to actually engage in fruitful ministry of evangelisation. But there has to be that openness of hearts and willingness of heart to actually engage in that space.
What excites me about possibilities with an intergenerational church is that we honour what's been and we build on what's been. And I think that's something that really sets us apart in the world, that we have this incredible, rich tradition and history that helps to inform where we're going. And I really love how Pope Francis has articulated that in Christus Vivit, this idea that young people can look forward to new horizons, but only if they are rooted in what's been. And I think that's something to really name and honour moving forward in the life of our church.
I love that saying, heirs of the past, responsible for the present, builders of the future.
Yeah, that
sums it up really nicely.
Yeah.